I wanted to show you a little bit of the kind of work and the kind of questions that myself and my students and collaborators have done over the last couple of years, and hopefully look for some ways to engage with sensing and building and all the kinds of projects that really I get excited about. I know that a lot of people here do. It seems like a really energetic space. This is just a photo. Again, this is not my project, but because I was showing the video, this was 50 of these kind of little drones that were all programmed with some new kind of hardware and software that's all open source, and they controlled them, and you kind of saw the visual effect. I just thought that would be neat since this is the swarm lab, and this is very swarm-like, and it's the first time they'd ever done something at this scale visually at night, and it was very eerie. I either thought I was seeing an art performance or perhaps a UFO kind of abduction. I wasn't quite sure at that moment, but it was a very eerie experience. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the work that I do, and one way that I like to motivate it is by looking at some projects that really get me excited. So this was a project called Operation Moonwatch, and this is from a long time ago, 1956, and it was basically some individuals that said they'd get together and try to learn how to spot satellites as they orbited the Earth. I actually coincidentally watched the International Space Station pass over Berkeley this morning around 6:15. If you were up, you could see it. They trained people to do this, and if you're doing the math, you'll realize that this was actually before Sputnik itself had even launched. So in fact, these are people that were training for something that wasn't even available for them to actually observe. And the other interesting thing is when Sputnik did launch, and of course this is a kind of caught a lot of people, a lot of governments off guard that this would be happening, this essentially group of amateurs were the best equipped to actually start to track this and record it and actually report on it. So it's one of those nice examples of amateurs or people without a lot of expertise making contributions. I'll give you another example. So this is the, of course, everyone recognizes supernova 2008 HA. More interestingly, this is the woman who discovered it. This is Carolyn Moore. She's at Warwick, New York, in high school there. And yes, she has more telescopes than probably most people in the room. But we have a lot of technology and a lot of sensing abilities that maybe don't look like telescopes, but we certainly can envision the kinds of technologies we do having these capabilities. So one thing is I'm really interested in the way that these sort of amateurs are playing a very significant role, and that's something that we'll kind of pick up a little bit in what I want to talk about. It's not just the sensing, it's also the building and the making, and I think most people are familiar with the kind of maker movement and culture that's been thriving over the last several years. This is a project I particularly like called Solar Center. I don't know if you've seen it. It's actually, it was actually positioned more as an art project, but it's a functional 3D printer that's positioned to really take advantage of the robust energy source of the Sahara Desert and the robust raw material of sand to essentially control a sintering device, and they can kind of bring these together. This is a bowl that was made using the solar sinter, so it sort of melts the elements inside of the sand together. And I think it's this combination of really looking at these cultures, these DIY cultures, and people that are kind of expert amateurs, and really lowering the bar to participation. That's an exciting research opportunity. We think back about big projects, clearly one of the canonical ones of putting a person on the moon and returning them safely. We think about who really made that happen. Of course, humanity sort of celebrated in that moment, but it was really the sort of brave scientists and engineers of the day that kind of made this happen in the sort of real story. Now, I don't know what the new challenges are. That's a whole separate debate. I don't know if it's the economy, if it's the environment, if it's food production or agriculture, education. That's a kind of very interesting debate that I really like to have about culturally what's interesting. And certainly science is going to play a very significant role. But I think the other thing that's going to be exciting from a standpoint of the research here is thinking about how we can strategize sort of everyday people and others to participate in problem solving along these kinds of solutions with people volunteering their time to take measurements and collect information. So we all kind of, this quote should resonate with most people, I think. And it was actually Elinor Ostrom who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. She said, "Bureaucrats sometimes do not have the correct information, while citizens and users of resources do." And I think everyone sort of gets that. It's, I know my bus route, I know my park, I know what's going on this part of campus, or whatever it is. People have a good sense, and they love opportunities to participate. So one of the things we've thought of is how we can actually engage people to do that. Now, these problems that I mentioned, obviously the environment or healthcare, these are very difficult problems, and traditional sort of engineering approaches often don't work completely. They're a class of problems called wicked problems. They're sort of societal level, and they're actually sort of incomplete often. They're contradictory. They're often difficult to even define. Even solutions create their own problems. And just give you like a quick example. Say that we said we're going to solve street crime. So we might say, okay, how are we going to solve street crime? And we start to have a little brainstorm about that, and might say, well, I don't know, we could disarm the police. That could possibly remove that. We could repeal the laws that actually define crime, so we could change the definition. That's a little bit of a cheat, but it is a solution. We could substitute some kind of ethical self-control for sort of the police or courts. We could just shoot the criminals. That's another kind of solution. And you can see these are all solutions, but I think everyone can kind of see, we could actually give stuff away. We could disincentivize. The problem is these problems are very hard, and there's no sort of single approach that everyone's going to agree on as the right thing. One thing that has been useful is using techniques such as design research to at least try to open up dialogues and sort of solution spaces in this area. And so design research, unlike design where you're thinking about industrial design where you're often making a product or a sort of artifact, design research is more inquiry focused on this, some kind of contribution to producing knowledge. So these are sort of terms you might associate with design. And these are ones that I would sort of more connect with design research. And I'll just pull out a couple. So design's often about sort of problem solving, where I would claim design research often makes problems intentionally to try to move the frontier forward from a research standpoint. Often things about consumers and buying, whereas design research looks maybe more at citizens or just promoting this kind of thinking. And design actually is, I'm not going to try to define it, but I particularly like this definition from Eric Adegard. Design isn't everything we make, but it's also between those things. It's a mix of craft, science, storytelling, propaganda, and philosophy. And I think that the challenge for a lot of you, a lot of us, is some of the problems have these require these kind of hybrid solutions and these hybrid mixes of disciplines and thinking, and that's going to be where I think Berkeley can really leverage some real contributions in the area. Now, as you heard, I actually was at the Intel Research Lab a number of years ago, and when I was there, I started this group, Urban Atmospheres. I had a chance to collaborate with a lot of great people. Some of them are from Berkeley. Some of them are actually still some students here that I'd worked with. And largely the idea was to look at urban spaces and deconstruct them and look for opportunities for technology to emerge in really sort of interesting and creative ways. I'm not going to go through these projects, but I do want to sort of in broad strokes paint. Some of them look like things you might expect, a mobile phone application. Others are park benches or trash cans or matchbooks, and a lot of them are about building and making new kinds of sensing. I would say one thing that was obviously happening at the time, and all of you in this room will probably remember this, was there were a lot of work on moats and sort of sensing technology. And a lot of that were built into these systems. They were put out as more design research artifacts, and they were studied in the field and in the wild, and they were put into very different kind of applications. I'll tell you about one of them, and that's this project called Jabberwocky that was about familiar strangers. So familiar strangers are people that are familiar to you, but they're strangers. So it's that guy that's always walking his dog near a neighborhood, that lady that always reads that same newspaper on the bus in the morning. They're an important part of your urban environment, but you don't actually interact with them. It's sort of a real relationship in which you both mutually agree to ignore each other without any implications of hostility. So if you ignore them, that's actually a nonverbal message that I'm mad at you, right? And we actually did a lot of things with moats, and we actually designed some ways of sort of visualizing and rethinking familiar strangers. One iteration happened to be with mobile phones using Bluetooth beaconing. to tell what kinds of people are around you. And you can imagine, are these people that have been to Nepheli, or are these people that live in my neighborhood? Are these the kind of places that other people visit that are similar to me? This probably sounds all very familiar, but this was all before Facebook and before all these kind of social apps you're aware of. And of course, now these are built into almost all these applications about thinking about the place and the people around you. Although we thought about it, I'm of course biased, but I think a little bit more poetically about the way that you would engage with that. Now, we were looking at kind of the seams of where to design these kind of ideas. Now, one of the places we actually drew inspiration from was social psychologists. So Stanley Milgram had looked at the same phenomenon in the 60s and 70s in sort of train platforms in Brooklyn, New York, and tried to understand how important these people were and how people felt a sense of belonging to place. And you can tell that obviously digital technology has created new ways to think about this socially and physically. We were also inspired by artists. So Vito Conci had done a piece where you identify a stranger in public and you follow them until they go into a private space. You're invited to do this performance, but you may be arrested, and I will not come bail you out of any kind of legal thing. But the point was that we actually were inspired also by artists. And it's an interesting way to think about, of course, as researchers, we're looking for problems on a societal scale. We're looking for things that have some sort of technical kinds of contributions, but also something that often artists have a way of dialoguing with in a different way. So you mentioned these space browsing blimps. This is some work I did with John Canny when I was a PhD student here in the kind of Wayback Machine. This is actually in the WAS, a long time ago. And the point was that these blimps that floated around, and they were looking mainly at issues around telepresence and social sort of tele-embodiment and nonverbal cues and things about how people would control these remotely. You can kind of, this is flying around campus and things. But they were also equally inspired around this project by Andy Warhol, where there's these blimps flying around the silver clouds that were kind of interacting with people. And it got me thinking about how important it is sometimes to look at these connections with artists and with other practitioners outside of our sort of normal sphere. So it got me thinking about a project that Michael Neymark had done in the 70s called the Aspen Movie Map. This was on Laserdisc, so it was amazing. And you could actually control this touch screen and interact with a view of a city as you moved around. And it got me thinking about something else that I'd seen recently. And it's not to say that if Michael had never done this, we would have never had Google Street View. But it's interesting to note that Michael actually received a Golden Fleece Award for this work. So for those of you not familiar, the Golden Fleece Award is an award given essentially for the most egregious waste of taxpayer dollars. So total waste of taxpayer dollars, probably not waste of taxpayer dollars. So again, I'm not trying to draw the literal connection, but often that sometimes artists actually have interesting ways of looking at, and exploring the similar kinds of design or research questions that we might have. The setup even looked the same, for goodness sake. Here's just a couple examples. Myron Kruger done this Video Place game. Looks very much like the kind of Sony iTour, even things you might have on Kinect now. Legible City by Jeffrey Shaw. Looks a lot like some of the fitness exercise equipment. This is another project by Artcom, which looks a lot like Google Earth. I don't know if those of you watched the Tour de France a couple years ago, but there was the Nike Chalkbot. Looks a lot like the Graffiti Writer, which was a project done by an art group. Similarly, Hiroshi Ishii and Maggie Orth with some of the tangible media triangles that they had positioned as these sort of art artifacts for education and teaching, and the Magda tiles that if you have kids, you might have a million of these around your house. And more recently, a project, TextMob, which directly inspired Twitter. And that's, it's not sort of coincidental. Jack Dorsey said, yeah, I saw this project and I said that's what Twitter should be like, so that's why we built it the way it is. But it's one of these nice connections of, I think there's value in looking outside your discipline, and particularly at these kind of more contentious conferences. So here I am again with a little more hair, so I'm starting to fade, so it's a little bit later. And these were some of the more later versions of these telepresence robots that, again, largely with my advisor, John Candy, that we built these, and they roamed around different parts of the building. And you can see there's this kind of gap in the time sequence of now you can kind of buy these. They're all over the airport and places. This is a more recent one I pulled just a couple weeks ago. There's a company, Double Robotics, that's putting an iPad up there to see that. They actually had a press release with all these usage scenarios, so I just like pulled my old photos from 1995. It's like, oh, there's my working one, and that's your working one, and that's my social one on Telegraph, and this is your social one. That's your interface. This is my interface. That's my interface. So the point I want to make with this is that it's often hard to envision these things. So when you see these projects now, they seem almost obvious. Like, yeah, the iPad, and I can make sense of that. But I want to remind you, when we were working on this, we essentially were running Windows 95. You know, we had Mosaic. You know, Alta Vista was the search engine. You might be using the Well or Usenet if you're using any social networking at the time. So it's often hard to envision the future. I think we're all aware of that. But I sort of encourage this risk-taking to put these things out there. Now I want to say something about why I think there's also a reason to look at kind of pushing towards innovation and creativity. And I know that a lot of the work that goes on here really echoes with that. But I think when I see, and this is a quote, I like this quote, this innovation companies today don't ask and don't care about basic skills, grades, or SAT scores. Instead, they want to know if you can brainstorm all the possible uses of bubble wrap. And the reason I point that out is that clearly, yes, fundamental skills are essential to doing and executing the kinds of projects that you do, but it's also important to, you know, feel uncomfortable and go and design and make things that might not feel as if, you know, they're perfect or they answer all the right questions, but sometimes when you're standing at that location and you've built those artifacts, they're the perfect pieces to start to question other things and open up really radically new kinds of essentially experiences for users. So in terms of education, I feel like if it were possible to define generally the mission of education, it could be said that its fundamental purpose is to ensure that all students benefit from learning in ways that allow them to participate fully in public, community, creative, and economic life. So you have to remember, of course, you're here and you're gaining skills, and we're trying to advance a sort of technical front, but we're also trying to make impact on a societal scale, and that's often hard to do. I want to come back to that sort of expert-amateur notion, because I think it's an interesting one in terms of, obviously we have all this sort of open courseware. There's more people becoming involved in the kinds of problems that were usually kind of reserved for the ivory tower, and it's really exciting to think about how people are now building 3D printers or replicating DNA, it's a low-cost PCR, or you know, fabricating toys in sort of small little devices. And I remind you, you think, well, some of these are sort of, maybe they're expensive or esoteric, but that is the same as what it was like not that long ago to have a laser printer. That was like a very fancy, expensive piece of hardware. So things happen fast. So the research that I do is largely in, these are sort of some of the core areas. I work in this living environments lab, which looks at this critical intersection of people and essentially the planet and technology, and look for opportunities to really develop and push on critical questions in that area. And one of them, probably the closest connection to some of the things going on here, is in citizen science and looking at sensors and also some actuators and ways for people to sense and report things around their environment. And also DIY culture, so people building and making their own kinds of things. And I'll mention briefly some of these other ones, but those are probably the main sort of points there. These are some of my students at Carnegie Mellon. They're fairly senior. They're going to stay there a little bit, but they'll make appearances here and be hopefully poking around Berkeley in some short order. And they're the ones largely responsible for a lot of the work. And they're also sufficient troublemakers, so they're calibrated for Berkeley, and they'll fit right in. It'll be great. So I'll say a little bit about citizen science again. And clearly, people often talk about these Christmas bird counts or ways of people counting natural phenomena in the world. And I also like the idea of citizen science because I think it touches on this area of thinking about reintroducing us to this idea of curiosity. When we were kids and we wanted to sort of, how many bugs are in my yard, and you know, is this flower blooming yet? Or how many cracks are on this like piece of cement? Or is there mold on this rock? Just strange questions you would ask. And a lot of our technology now does great things, and we want it to sort of help us, get to the bus stop on time and help us, find a good restaurant when we're out of town. But I think there's other opportunities to have us engage in public life and start to ask questions and start to almost present hypotheses and sort of work as a collective to sort of solve them or come to some consensus. So it's really trying to rethink the mobile phone from not just a communication tool, but a sort of, this sort of supercomputer radio station with sensors. It's sort of a little bit better way of framing what it is. Sort of a measurement instrument. And there's a lot of projects, actually a lot of these are at Berkeley, where people have done these kind of participatory citizen science, crowdsourced style kind of collective data. And there's projects in this lab too that I know fit into this same model. I'm not going to be complete in really iterating through all of them, so this is sort of a high level pass to show you that. I will say why I think citizen science particularly could make some really good impact. One is it could improve the sort of science literacy of people, because it can have them be involved in actually making a hypothesis and testing it out in very much the same way that scientists obviously do, and they're sort of proactively involved in that. It can also provide scientists with these richer or different kinds of data sets to work with, and also develop new user experiences around these platforms, so our phone is not just for the cool bars and the hit music. It can also be an engagement into government and civic life and other kinds of health issues or things. And finally, of course, creating some kind of connection to the environment. So there's a lot of things that it can sort of provide as also an educational tool. So I'll try to paint a picture with a couple projects that we did in this area. One of them was looking at air quality, and this was a project done a while ago. It's actually this side of the picture. This is a little bit later picture, but this was data collected from Accra, Ghana in Africa. And it was basically just students and taxi drivers that collected air quality data around the city. And this is like, I think, a 24-hour shot of where the data was collected. There's a heat map on top of it. And this was done with R.J. Haneke and some other folks that you're probably familiar with. The point was that, of course, we wanted to initially generate the fact that air quality data varied across the city, right? At the current time, it was kind of reported as just a single number at best, and the fact that it actually had this variation. Of course, we got those kind of results. We had this, quantitative data showing how it changed over time. The more interesting, I thought, result was really the qualitative data we got from individuals as they came back to return the equipment. And they started telling these stories about how they said, yeah, I noticed it was a really high number, so I wouldn't go downtown at that time. And I took this ring road a different way. And I was worried about my car, so I brought my own car in. I thought I might be part of the trouble. And they started to strategize about how they were going to integrate this into their lives. This was sort of something they could never see or experience before, and now it's available to them. And I really liken it to this sort of Prius effect. So the same way, we've been, maybe you have a Prius or you've been behind someone trying to get to the holy grail 100 mile per gallon, just nirvana moment. But it's once you give someone this visualization and once you give them some awareness of this, they want to change their behavior, or they often do. And there's times when they don't, of course, but this is certainly an interesting phenomenon about sort of persuasive technology and how people change their thinking around the world, or around their world and their behaviors.
Can you say something about how you set this up? The logistics, what did you gave people something and you asked them to do something?
On this particular study? Sure. Yeah, so we basically gave, like I said, students and taxi cab drivers a setup of, it was carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, it was nitrogen oxide, we had a particle sensor. It was a very clumsy setup.
Big thing.
Big, crazy thing. Sorry I dumped the picture from the slide deck.
With a radio in it? Or?
So it was a backpack setup for the students. This is about 2005, so it was not designed to be on the mobile phone at that time. It was just data collection. Collected the data, they walked around. Log it and they got it later. The point was, and it's a good reason you brought it up, is because in the design of this, the study was, the whole point, the hypothesis was the one I originally presented, like what would data look like if it was collected by non-experts throughout a city in their normal everyday interactions. And it was not designed to give them any special visual feedback. They were not trained about, okay, here's what you should look for, change your behavior. That was a side effect that came out. And again, that was with zero design. We hadn't thought about any way to train them or even thinking about how to use it. The one thing that is true about it is these were calibrated pieces of equipment. So it's higher end equipment.
But there was some readout. They didn't have to bring it back to their computer to read the data.
Right. There was enough. You could imagine, you're probably familiar with a lot of these equipment. There's some kind of diagnostic code and telling you what it's doing.
And if something was bad, if things smelled bad and the needle went up, then they would know that.
Right. Well, more interestingly, we've done workshops with these kinds of sensors, and two things happen. First, everyone wants to set them off. So we give them to people, they immediately go shove it in an exhaust pipe or in a sewer drain. And as I calibrated, they work, but you need to prove this to yourselves. It's something that's an important part of the experience. Also, people always want to find themselves on the data set, right? So when you give them a data set of, here's data across Berkeley or San Francisco, everyone wants, well, let me see my house. What's that red dot? What's the problem there? The second thing that's interesting that happens is if someone's holding one of these sensors, they start to have this granted all kinds of access. I mean, we've seen people just walk into people's houses. They don't know, like, oh, can I just sample things in here? If I would have known you could get into nightclubs just holding a sensor, I mean, this could have saved me a lot of money in my youth. But it's an interesting phenomenon because you become almost an authority figure because you have something that looks like this sort of a sensor or something that looks official. So there's something else to be explored there, but those are really good points. Did I answer that?
Yeah. The other thing I was going to ask is, what was the motivation for them to do this?
Oh, sorry. They were paid some small amount of money. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, most of these, almost all the studies, I mean, they go through IRB and they're paid some small amount. And yeah, we just interview them about their experience. So, and that we recruited them specifically because they were students or we want to see taxi drivers moving around. So similarly, we want to think about not just that personal mobile experience of what it would be like to carry around the sensor, but what if these sensors were attached to, for example, the infrastructure. So these were some sensors that we attached, and this was with Paul Aoki and Allison Woodruff and some others about attaching sensors to actually street sweepers that moved around San Francisco. We also looked at fixed sort of indoor monitoring. So the same way you look and see if your friends are online or what music they're listening to, right? These sort of status updates. What if you could see inside your friend's home what their air quality was? So this was a particle counter that was calibrated to count the particles in someone's home. And all these sort of, again, it was positioned as just have this in your home. We want to see how you integrate it into your life. And the more interesting things that came out, of course, there's sort of there's the, quantitative data that shows people actually improved their air quality once they could see it. But the qualitative stories often speak more in terms of people that saw that they were really high. They were much more out of calibration than all their friends. And there's actually 2 individuals that quit smoking as a result of just seeing their data. There's people that learned about when they open their windows or they vacuum or they do different behaviors, how that affects their air quality. And they sort of this became part of their vernacular. So they said, I wonder what it's like at my house, or I wonder what it's like at my office, or I wonder what it's like in my kid's school. And so once you have this kind of lens, you start to think about how to use that. Another version was creating these more publicly placed versions. So these were given to different communities. So communities of bicyclists or families or some activists, just different communities. And we gave them a set of these and said, put them up wherever you want to put them and collect information. And it was all sort of wireless, and it would report this up to a website and all the usual things. We were more interested in that study in trying to see how these communities would strategize and want to use them and discuss them. And they all did very different things. I think I have a picture in a minute here. Well, I thought I did. Well, but anyway, sorry.
How long of term did people have these systems? Did they actually become obsessed with them and spend their time looking at the numbers for weeks or to the exclusion of other things, or just really have a short time?
Right, yeah, no, good question. The question was how long did they basically have these in the study? So they all vary. The first study, the Ghana study, they had them for I think 2 weeks, pretty short amount of time. The indoor air quality, we actually deployed that for 8 months in one of the studies to really try to remove some novelty effects, which I think is one of the problems with all of these, and I'm, of course, very sensitive to this, is they all seem exciting to use at first. But would you really want to have this thing beeping and reporting and checking in and alerting you? So a lot of the kind of current questions are how would you live with this in day 72? And I think that's a big part of how you design these kind of things. This was deployed for, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks, a little bit different. This one it had to have battery life and kind of live outdoors, and we didn't really put solar on it or anything. And it also suffered from the police intervention because it looked like a bomb. So I got a lot of calls from the police, and I kind of knew that was going to happen. It's actually part of the research was the commentary about ubiquitous computing and how we're not really ready to have it every place, and what should it look like? Should it look like a black box that's flashing red light? Should it look like a teddy bear? Should it look like a tree camouflage? So I think that's another debate about the kind of design of the physical form. So, but that's a good question, how long they're deployed.
Well, more, what is the effect on people's lives? I mean, if the idea is to go forward with these devices, might it actually work to people's detriment to have these things?
Yeah, no. There are actually bad examples of that. One that I'm not showing you, not because it had actually good results, but we did something with water and water conservation, but it was so interesting, people ran the water forever to watch it do things. So it had this really bad initial effect of like, wow, this is so cool, and I'm like, you're wasting so much water. And then there's, as usual, once there's an adoption, and it's lost its novelty. But you're right, we'd like to, some of these groups we've gone back to and interviewed them after the fact. And with a lot of these, it ends up, with these studies like this, they go, oh, I wish I could keep this. Why do you have to take this stuff back? Because I wanted to take it on a trip with me. I wanted to try it out in a different place. What we actually interviewed, and we do a lot of the research, is we try to understand when they see this, where do they start applying that thinking elsewhere? So for example, in some of the interfaces, we gave them actual numbers. And that let people reflect on, oh, I use this much water when I'm showering. I wonder how much my dishwasher uses, more or less than that. So, but when they had a kind of more, like a streetlight metaphor where it's like you're above or below without a number, then that helped them actually save more, and they felt that was easier to kind of understand. So, as always, the right solution is in some kind of hybrid area where you'd like them to reflect more, but you also would like to kind of not overburden the kind of user. Yes?
Did people make comments like, could I buy this? Or do you think people would buy these things? Or was it because it was free? Some cool researcher came and gave it?
No, people want to buy them. And we've done, actually some of these pictures we're trying to drive the cost down as low as possible. So I think the BOM on some of these more recent versions was maybe around $15 or $20. We're trying to see how low could you go and still have a signal. There's a kind of other question about when it gets so low, it's just noise, and you're really not getting any, people start to ignore it the same way when your smoke detector keeps beeping. You're just like, that's just the low battery, don't just ignore that. But I think people are interested and they want to use these. We've done a lot of projects where essentially we give people technology or give them a new lens into some kind of data set. And of course they're excited, but I'm not going to sort of say great because we're doing great work. Because I am pretty convinced that, again, on day 72, 92, they're going to say this thing's really a pain to use. I don't like having this thing all the time. So we've been trying to do a lot more long-term deployments, a lot more thinking about what it really would be like to converse and live with that experience. But yeah, these are great. These are exactly the kind of questions we need to kind of work on. Okay. Oh, I was just going to mention that we also, although we look at sensors as certainly sensors that I think all of us would kind of agree is a sensor, like something that looks like it's some digital piece of technology or maybe some kind of a chemical or biological process. We look specifically, actually, there's a whole piece of research where we looked at how even the environment is itself a sensor. So looking at the way bees or plants behave as an interesting way of indicating and learning and observing the world. It's kind of new ways of seeing. And this was Stacy. She got a Best Paper Award for this at UbiComp last year, actually. I'll say a little bit more about the Street Sweeper project. And this was, again, collaboration when I was at Intel and a number of other colleagues that you see up there. And the idea was that although we had done the deployments with individuals, when people are moving around, or most of us don't move around that much, so we thought, here's something that moves around the city. In fact, we can deploy about 15 street sweepers, and we can get the entire San Francisco coverage. We can get a data point from every place in the city every 48 hours or maybe every 72 hours, depending. So it was sort of good bang for your buck in terms of just the deployment. There's obviously some problems with that. Street sweepers kick up dust. We weren't measuring dust. And also where we position the sensors. Other good solutions would be, meter-made carts or, a mail deliverer or something like that. We just had access to the infrastructure in San Francisco. So we looked at a lot of these things. This is kind of what the data would look like in terms of as it was collecting the information. So there's another sort of research challenge around how people visualize these and how they start to debate the data sets. Because I think all of us as scientists are looking, saying, yeah, well, some of this seems reasonable. It's kind of worse pollution on 280, but or in Hunters Point and different parts of the city you might be familiar with. But also, you're well aware that there's noise in these data sets, and there's not always completely accurate. These are sometimes drifting and uncalibrated. Although it was nice because all the street sweepers parked in the same lot at night, so we could cross-calibrate them. That was nice, and some other things. Okay. Oh, I did. Sorry, this was somehow out of sequence. This is just showing you how does different communities used, and this is just a small snapshot of the data of how they moved around and deployed the sensors and did different things with them. So I also want to talk about the other side of sensing, and that is how people experience these data sets. And a lot of it is, of course, on graphs and maps, and that's a really good place to look. But we've also looked at, could there be these more public experiences? So signs that tell you the cleanest route through the city or the shortest route rather than the shortest route. Similarly, we've looked at how actual other objects you don't think of as sensors could participate. This is an actual T-shirt that actually has sensors embedded into it, and so it's kind of a wearable sensor. It creates a very different experience. So most of you in the room will get the technology. It's not this is sort of, oh, that's radically new technology, but by changing the actual representation and the form and the experience, now this person walks into the cafe, they light up, people are, what is that? Wait, why is it different inside? Go over here, go in this other place, cross the street, wait at the bus stop. So this person becomes this active participant in this dialogue rather than a personal kind of sensor on your mobile phone. And as usual, the solution is probably a mix of these kinds of different experiences. Yeah?
So it seems like that example you had with the clean route or whatever could have negative consequences that now everybody drives down that route.
Right. There's ways that so there was obviously a concept. We didn't actually build that, but you're right. I mean, it could, it's like a load balancing thing, right? So you don't want to direct everyone there, but maybe it has something to do with schools are getting out or bus routes or predictive. There's different ways you could imagine modeling it. But it's certainly giving a prompt to think about how the city is, there's different weights to use when moving or transiting through spaces. So this is also one of my students, Stacy, built some, these are really, it's very DIY, but the idea was to have these kind of sensors that you could throw out, much like, I don't know how familiar you are with these throwies. You can throw little LEDs onto magnetic surfaces, but this would actually climb up and take measurements up higher and do things and sort of interact with people. And you could sort of tap on the wall and it could listen and come down and respond to you. And there's a new way of interacting with positioning sensors and doing things with them. And she also looked at really low cost, this is even lower cost sensing, in this idea of kind of, I'm saying, spectacle computing. So usually you think of how do we design this to fit in transparently and just seamlessly into the environment. And we're saying actually there could be reasons you might want to strategically put this out as something that's very overt and invites curiosity. Not the same as, say, a flash mob where you're sort of drawn in and just kind of observe as a passive observer, but these were balloons that actually sensed air quality and they lit up accordingly. They're lit up different colors because they're sensing different gases and particles and things. But the point was they were low cost and people would see these balloons and they would just come up. This was not sort of a technical part, but again, the experience was that now people became proactive in this. So they said, what is this? Oh, and they would start moving it around. They brought it, to different parts of the city. Other people asked them about it. So very low cost ways to get people thinking about sensing and moving around and interacting and really pushing a question. You can imagine this, people walking around someplace trying to bring basically deliver a message about, say, in this case it was just air quality, but other issues as well. So one thing I think is really what's going on is this idea of volunteering, and I think this is where there's a huge opportunity for people to participate. So now when we think of volunteering, it's maybe, well, you know, I might essentially do a beach cleanup, that might be a couple hours, or I might go to Habitat for Humanity, it might be a couple days, or I might actually go abroad and teach, or I might decide to join the Peace Corps or military service and go away for years. But the model suits these pretty large chunks. So the interesting thing is, for micro-volunteerism, what does it mean to say, I'm at Hearst and Euclid and I have 47 seconds, what can I do? And so I think there's an interesting design space to say, what are the set of things people could do in these short amounts of time? Would it be collecting data? Would it be like just comparing two pictures? So some of it's kind of on the go crowdsourcing, but some of it's opportunistic about where people are and what they're doing. I'll paint you a little bit of a picture. So traditionally, like we've talked about, this is what your usual kind of citizen science project might look like. There's a beetle infestation and, you know, over in Strawberry Creek, and you saw one of the beetles and you took a picture and you sent it in, and the scientists get it and they marshal their resources and they solve the infestation problem, and victory, and everybody's happy. And it does sometimes work like that. But when we've done these projects, be it air quality or water or any of the things I mentioned before and some that I didn't, people say, hey, that was a cool project, but I only care about beetles. I care about idling buses. So then we go, okay, let's do the idling buses application for you. So at some point we said, well, could we basically empower people to build their own kind of crowdsourced kind of citizen science projects? So could you say, I want people to take a picture, I want people that only live in the East Bay, or only in my neighborhood, or they're only dog walkers, or whatever the criteria, and I could compose this very easily as a non-expert, and then I could perhaps advertise it. So someone arrives here, they get out of the BART tube at downtown Berkeley, and it says, hey, there's some new campaigns, do you want to be involved? You also have kids, maybe you care about the idling bus issue that, you know, Susan does, or something like that. And then, of course, the data comes in, and say Susan can manage it, and then also she can also be, hopefully the data is in a format that can also be used by other sort of stakeholders. So again, lots of big problems in here. I'm not claiming solutions, but I think this is an interesting sort of landscape to go towards. So I'll give a couple kind of open challenges in this area. One of them is really aligned with some of the work here. So one of the things is you're going to want to use different sensors for different kinds of problems. So it might be air quality in Pittsburgh, but it might be pesticides in the Central Valley here in California, or something else. So how are people going to have this ensemble of sensors? How are they going to sort of move between them and share them, and sort of have them for different contexts really easily? Another one is how are you know, people going to not just have citizen science, so collecting data, but also analyzing data. So you might be concerned about an issue going on near the Gulf Coast with, say, when there was an oil spill down there. Now, we don't live near there, so we can't go down to the beach and actually help document that, but maybe we can help analyze the data. So that's another opportunity. Kind of taking the cognitive surplus that's available and using it, very much like crowdsourcing opportunities. There's also just foregrounding people's contribution. It's amazing if you just let people know the EPA downloaded your data, or hey, we changed the bus route based on some of the data you collected, letting people know that their data is actually making some kind of a change. Everyone now collects crazy badges, right? So there's also this idea of, we think about, you might check in someplace and become the mayor of the space, or you unlock the pizza eating late night badge, or whatever it is. But how could you rethink this to say, you know, you've unlocked the rivers and streams badge, or you're now the citizen scientist of, you know, Lake Anza, or you've actually unlocked a microclimate because you've helped participate. These are different ways of thinking of that same kind of contribution model. Using games and play as well to sort of get people to think about and motivate them to actually collect data. So you might imagine a game where one of the elements is bumblebees, for example, and maybe your scoring is based on that, or as you move around the city you collect bumblebees, and it might be that that is really pollen data. So you start to learn about where pollen counts are collected and used, but then you also could imagine, I'd like to put some bees into the game, so I'll collect some pollen information, and then you're actually helping contribute towards this citizen science effort, but you're also playing the game, and it's a scaffolding technique for people to become more involved with these kinds of processes. And another one that's probably interesting to think about for a lot of this group is, well, maybe sensors don't have to always look like those sensors we're used to. Could there be toys that have soil sensors on them? Could they be on different kinds of objects and materials? Could they kind of speak to us in different ways than a lot of the times where we put things out there as giving numbers or lights? Could they give other kinds of outputs? All right, so I'll finish with one last project. It's a little bit different, and it really connects, I think, nicely with some of the locale work that's been really going along extremely well here at Berkeley. And it's really thinking about energy in a very different way. It's thinking about it as a material. So usually you plug into the wall, you get power, it's uniform, it works very well, and that's a very good thing. But there's other opportunities to think about how it might have a different connection to energy. So I'll give you an example that's admittedly overly emotional, but I think it will drive the point home. So this is my son, Paxton. So imagine he's out swinging, and he collects just a little bit of energy, just a little bit of energy drift. And he brings it home. And that night, say, I read a book to that light that he generated. So is that different than plugging into the wall? And I would claim, yes, it was sort of handcrafted. It was a gift. It's personally made. It has this emotional gift. It was given to me. And admittedly, this is, again, the overly sappy example, but the way I would position this is saying, well, right now when we think about energy, we talk about how to consume it and reduce consumption. But just like we're well aware with computers and computer networking and social networking, how would people collect little bits of energy? How would they keep them? How would they share them? We have social norms around take a penny, leave a penny. Would you be getting off your bus and leave a couple joules or take a couple joules? What's the social norm about little bits of energy? And to be clear, little bits of energy does not an energy crisis solve. But it does create a new way for people to think about what they want to do with these small little bits of something that is useful. So we've done studies where people bicyclists want to keep their energy and use it only with bicyclists. Or parents want to use it with parents, or different kinds of networks. They want to do different things. People that live in a dorm together want to collect all the energy of people going in the door all semester long and then try to watch a movie at the end of the semester with the energy from that. So there's scales and numerical things that maybe don't work out, but some of them do. In fact, people already generate their own energy, right? It's just this medium scale. So this is like the mini computer. When we get to these small scales, what do we do? And now what do? You just kind of give it back to the grid. But you could imagine policies are different kind of ways you might want to distribute or use this. And these are just some artifacts that we've built to study some of these phenomena. So things like a lamp that kind of tells you the kinds of energies that are available. So right now you don't think about what's coming out of the outlet. Is this fresh energy or stale energy or hydroelectric energy or coal energy, or what is this? So there's different ways to think about what that is. You might imagine if you're going to make a phone call, would you actually change your behavior if you were going to use solar energy versus you were going to use hydroelectric or something else? And it gets you to think of it again as as a material. You might think about things that actually you power yourselves. We've, again, done studies where we've looked at how people react to using these different things that essentially do the same thing, but largely the materials on this side, people feel more authentic, more in connection with the actual thing they're making. And in another sort of example, we've built these artifacts that are kind of almost energy mementos. They collect and keep these small bits of energy. So would you, with your father, perhaps turn a hand crank and then sort of put it on a shelf? Like, that's the energy my dad and I made. Now, that's another extreme example, but there's more small-scale ones about just would you sort of share energy with other people at Berkeley or other people that are students. So we built some technology to do that, largely a lot of supercapacitors and sort of new technologies. You can do a lot of things. You can drive an LED for 8 or 9 hours on just some of these small hand cranks. And I'll finish with one example. It's more of a kind of provocative art piece around these energy parasites. And these are designed not to sort of conserve energy, but explicitly comment on where it's leaking out and where there's opportunities to sort of take it and re-own it and reuse it in different ways. So you can imagine, wind as it passes through a subway tunnel or a BART train or on a tram. Or in these examples, you can see we've also put it, a headlight that you can capture energy off someone's car, sort of steal some of their little bits of energy, or a handrail on an escalator. You can sort of steal a little energy from there. And again, it's not supposed to be these are saving energy, or water wheel to fountain. So these are supposed to be fun and playful. It's supposed to get you to think a little bit about the kinds of ways you engage or think about energy. So again, these are the areas that I'm largely interested in. There's a big EPA grand challenge around citizen science right now. If you want to get involved, that'd be great. Come find me or talk to me. Some of the other ones I didn't mention are also interesting. There's other topics that I also have only done a little bit of work in, but they're far-reaching. Things like DIY bio. I'm not a biologist, but I'm really interested in some of the ways biology could play a role. Games and play. I'm looking a lot at kind of living organisms and things like that on a small scale. And toys and things. So I'll just leave it at that. So thank you for, went a little bit over, but thank you for sticking it out.
Questions?
With all of these people and joining these projects, do you have any concern with the ethics of how the data is used? For example, in your air quality thing, like you told them we're going to use this just to collect air quality data, but you had GPS trackers on it, so you just easily could have been like, you could have easily could have used that information to track individual persons' movements and etc.
Right. No. So first of all, obviously all these things we have kind of IRB consent, and we work through a lot of them. But you're right. The broader question is, okay, great. Someone might be saying, I'm so happy I'm collecting this data. They might not realize that they're actually sharing information that allows someone to essentially know about them and who they are and what they're doing. And you can imagine embedding other apps of where's the best place to rob someone. Well, the data set's there to probably build that app, right? First, there's a caveat of we could sort of solve all of the privacy issues and then move forward. But I think that would be kind of a mistake to at least not push those questions early. I think you're right. Of course, people need to realize, yes, there's going to be this initial excitement about collecting data and maybe being part of a community. Some of those issues have been worked out in the way that data can be sort of anonymized to some extent. I know there's not like a solved, complete problem, but I think there's going to be a point where people will want to participate, and the value will outweigh some of that. So you can imagine even things that a person will be passing by a place. Or not, say, there's two different kinds of sense. You could be reporting it all the time, which kind of maybe reveals too much. Or maybe I'm involved with one of these campaigns. I'm cutting across the street. It says, hey, we don't have any data from this corner for 2 weeks. Could you report some? Yeah, okay, there's my little data. So something that's a little bit more sparse, I think people would be interested in participating more. But it's surprising. I mean, in the HCI and the ubiquitous computing community, we debated for a long time, like people are going to want all these strategies for maintaining their privacy and where their location is. And then someone showed up with, the iPhone and all its location stuff, and people just all turned it on and started sharing like a ton more than I think anyone in my community would have ever guessed. I think everyone thought, well, they're going to want to use like all these different algorithms of like masking things. Like, no, I'm just here. I'm checked in here. This is where I am. I'm not at home. My house is unattended. That's how it is. I mean, that's a little bit of the reality. So I'm sensitive to both, though. I'm not trying to sidestep it. I think there are important questions. I think the important thing is building the artifacts and creating the experiences drives that dialogue. That's a good question. Yeah. Help.
Yeah. Other questions? Great.
Continuing on with that, do you think it's in like the designers? Do you think it's the designer's responsibility to maintain privacy like that? Like, even if the user is willing to give that all away, should the designer enforce something like, no, you can't tell me everything you want to tell me, just in the interest of safety and security?
I think the role of the designer in these examples, because it's sort of somewhat early in the state, is to not hide those, but almost maybe make them overt, right? So that draws your sensitivity to them. And that's kind of an issue of the design, where you could imagine in one sense, one version on one extreme is the one you're predicting where it's all hidden and you don't really know what's happening. The other one's showing you everything. Maybe there's a prompt in the middle that just tells you when you're, at a place that your friends have never seen you before. Or just something that goes, wait, why would they know that? Like, or just kind of getting you to think about the odd circumstances that are occurring by you sharing this data. But they don't all have to be like that. I mean, a lot of the projects, I think the point I'm trying to get across is that we're going to move forward and build things. They are intentionally going to question things around privacy, But I claim that's a good thing because then it will be part of the kind of public debate rather than these all roll into products and no one has that discussion. So I think we're going to, everyone in this room knows there's already tons of sensors on mobile devices. They will maybe do more than just tell you the cell strength on your phone or the temperature or whether or not something's close to your head or not. So what do we want them to sense and how do we want to share that data? And that's definitely an open challenge, so it'd be great if you're interested in trying to work on that. That's great. I know a lot of people in this room are.
Anyone else? John.
So you probably addressed this, but I'm just trying to think about this citizen science work at a meta level and kind of the objectives of the work generally. And I mean, it seems like you're building a new kind of instrument, and you're thinking about the best. Are the objectives of the work to understand how to best build this instrument that can collect data, so that you can have some model about what would happen if you deployed this in new situations and new sensors in the future and make it as efficient as possible? Is that kind of what you're getting at? Because you're doing a lot of things here, and I didn't see a clear objective why we're doing this. Well, other than it's cool and there's a lot of neat things that may come out of it, but
that's a fair critique. I mean, but I think the point is there's a spectrum of challenges, right? There's technically, how do you build the sensors? How do you keep them calibrated? Where do you even put them to be positioned to be used by people? But we're more questioning, what would the experience be of living with these kinds of things? How would you incorporate them in your daily life? So much more of that is on the side of when you're collecting data, how do you do it? Who do you share it with? How do you debate it? How do you kind of make policy decisions based on that? Or how can you quickly react to situations where there's, something happens, there's a nuclear disaster that has a problem in Japan. Like, how can you say, well, now we want to sense something different, and here's algorithms of how people should collect data, and here's how we can sort of disseminate the information to get the people to collect it in the sort of most productive way.
Right. So you make the assumption that this will be part of our future, and how do we best get to that point? How do we make it agile, reliable, and all that stuff? As how that's what I was getting at before. How do you best engineer this as this interesting instrument that's going to be part of our life in the future?
Well, I think largely people are used to when they now you can say, I need a picture of something X, and you can send out this kind of mass distribution. People are good at using a sensor called a camera to take these pictures and answer these questions. And I think one of the questions is, what other sensors will there be? How will they be integrated into these platforms and the environment? And how will it feel as if it's a sort of a community tool that people can use as a resource? Mm-hmm. There's definitely challenges around the technical side. So if you look back, this really rolls back into some of the moats and the sensor networks, which was a lot of the work was, how do you build robust topologies? How do you route things efficiently? How do you guarantee these redundancies? So that, if you think about, okay, those are important things to have for various network and kind of fail-safe mechanisms and robustness. But ultimately, the other side of that is, well, those were largely designed to kind of sit and be somewhat invisible and kind of collect data. What will the experience be when it's more proactive and people are, able to go out and sense this information, sense the data, or collect it? Or more interestingly, how do people make sense of these kind of data sets? So the one thing that I would point back to is the slide where I was trying to talk about, I think citizen science, the value is it brings people closer to this science literacy. They say, I wonder if X, oh, I know how I could do that. I could tell people to help collect this data, and then we could answer X. And then people say, actually, it's probably Y. Oh, well, then let's check for Y too. And so they start to think, and they have that, again, back to this curiosity of their world rather than, the phone or their mobile device becomes, a tool for helping them just get to the BART on time or something. It's like more of a tool for almost like democracy and civic engagement.
That I would say that was a side effect of what that wasn't what you set out to do. Right?
Oh.
We can talk about it more
Yeah,
later.
okay,
but,
fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have those grand, I mean, of course, it's a vision, that's a bigger, broader vision, but try to bite off little pieces. Yeah, fair enough.
Great, thanks.
So all the examples that you talked about seem to be people engaging with the technology solo. Like one person, technology, interacting with other people, intermediated through the technology and maybe some other interface, and like maybe at a distant time. But when I think about human social experiences, oftentimes people will do stuff together, like physically together. People will go shopping together, and where the goal is almost more the together than the shopping. And people go out to eat together. And I wonder, to what extent can citizen science be something or that people can do together? So, let's go out and measure butterflies, or something, but where it's essential that it's being done together. And what could be done to support that? Or is that something you think is reasonable?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the things we did do, to be fair, there's some togetherness, like the one where we gave community sensors. We explicitly didn't give them enough for everyone, so they would have to negotiate pairs and triplets to go do things. And the balloons were obviously about kind of this communal activity with less solo. But fair enough, some of them were about one, and I'm trying to hopefully broaden what that experience would be with groups. And I think the key thing is if you think about the way people engage with, say, social networking, right? They're used to feeling part of some kind of community or their friends or a space or some activity or event. So how can you basically use some of those same strategies to feel like you're part of a campaign, you're part of some initiative? So a lot of at least the design around some of these other tools that I'm talking about would be, hey, I helped make that happen because I was part of that micro-volunteerism group that was sort of spontaneously formed for 2 weeks, and we helped sort of collect some really important data. We helped sort of answer some questions. We're a little bit more flexible because now people are used to feeling with people but not physically close to them. You can imagine visiting places that other people in that community have visited, but I think some of those we were interested in how people would negotiate the sharing of resources and physically moving together. You see people all the time they'll text back and forth, they're sitting next to each other, right? So would you be helping collect sensor data or sort of analyzing things and sort of coming to different conclusions? Would that be part of the conversation? I think that's part of the challenge, is how the things that probably all of us are used to looking at charts and graphs and sensor data and heat maps and really playing with the data, how can that be the kind of just vernacular of just everyone to sort of be part of that discussion? Sometimes coming to the wrong conclusions, but participating nonetheless. I think that's the key, is to get the invitation to participation. And some of them will be important questions, but some of them could be, just inviting children to just say, hey, I'm counting, crazy weeds in my yard. I got so many weeds, I bet you don't have as many as me. Sounds like a kind of crazy question, but it means that children will naturally think, hey, when I have these answers, I reach out to others and I use these digital technologies to connect and answer them, and it's fun and playful. And then those people hopefully later become kind of, civic leaders, and they go, well, that's just part of how I engage with life. Sometimes, I don't know what that is, you look on Wikipedia or Google, or, you use your sensor posse essentially to go out and collect stuff. That's kind of hopefully where the trend is going. That just becomes an everyday thing. Sorry, yeah.
So I guess following up a little bit, or something related, what across all of the different projects that you had, was there a common theme of what motivated people to start participating? Was it, I really care about the air quality, for example, or my friends are doing it, or these random strangers seem to be doing it, I don't want to be left out of the crowd? What motivates people to get even started about this?
Right, so some groups, it was biased because we go to someone that was already a community interested in whatever, say the air quality in their area. So we were interested in those studies in less, would people want to use it, more, imagine someone had a concern, how would they integrate this into their practice? Some of it is admittedly, it's a pretty cool new gadget to toy around with for a while. Modulo, you might be bored and upset by it in 12 weeks. But I think what has happened by and large from when you look at most of the data and the results is it's once people have the ability to see something that they couldn't normally see or experience, then they start to really expect to be able to apply that all the time. So if I tell you, if say 20 years ago we were talking and I said, oh my gosh, I got to call you back, I only have one bar, you would say, I didn't even know you owned a bar. What are you talking about? When did you buy a bar? So we have entered into the vernacular. We understand what a bar is. We know what that is. We don't even think about it. But that seemed weird 20 years ago. So the idea is to try to think about how that'll become commonplace. But I think your question was really that kind of what motivates them. We haven't done enough long-term studies to really know. That's part of the open challenge of trying to figure out what kinds of, on the very basic level, should it disappear all the time or prompt you, or how disruptive will it really be? But most people, they realize that they don't think of, I keep going back to air quality. We have done other things besides air quality, but that's the one that sort of resonates the strongest, is you usually don't think about it, and suddenly you have this awareness of how it changes every day. And we've worked with the EPA on this too, and it's interesting because they sort of realize they're a regulatory agency and they need to sort of maintain really calibrated equipment for compliance and sort of legislative issues. But they are very aware of the fact that, they say, we need to do things that engage the public in this, and we want them to be more aware of what we do and how we do it and how important it is. But they also know that data is going to be messy. And that's another question of how to integrate that together and have people look at those same data sets and realize, okay, some of these are a little more reliable than others. Maybe some is not even giving me good data, but might give me tracers of some other elements that I can send out or marshal other resources that are more calibrated. Sorry, I don't know if I answered that at all. I kind of wandered around. I apologize.
I just wondered whether any of the companies, a lot of industries are there for trying to push products and things like that, whether they use it as a marketing tool to make this kind of devices and using it already. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, if you think about it now, so first of all, there are companies that have obviously thought about, we're going to put sensors into phones. They do it mostly for usability issues, right? So touch screens and proximity sensors and light sensors, you can sort of go down the list. So they've definitely, a lot of companies, most of the mobile handset manufacturers have made some prototype of some kind of other sensors that they've built. Usually it comes down to cost and motivating would people spend extra money for it. But I will say, if you sit down and maybe you take your iPhone, you set it out, that's saying something about you. It's saying, this is part of my clothing. This is how I look, and this is my choices in what I want to express to you. That whether or not you're going to be overt about, I own this product, it's the same as dressing. It's part of your clothing. So you can imagine, would I have a device that I put down and it's sort of, oh, that's the Sierra Club phone. Your data's going to Sierra Club. Oh, I got to get me one of those. Could there be branding around these other kinds of ways of people thinking about, I belong to, Greenpeace or, Planned Parenthood or whatever it is, and these devices are visual representations of your beliefs or where you trust your data, where you want to contribute to. So that's another framing you can take this another direction in. So I think there's no doubt that I don't think there's any doubt there's going to be new kinds of ways of thinking of mobile devices that will do sensing. It's just how are we going to socially kind of put them into our lifestyles? And the privacy issues are going to be part of it, but it's also going to be, who's going to own the data, how are we going to share it, how are we going to, again, come to these debates and consensuses on it. But companies are definitely interested in this largely because, well, they want to sell, they want to have a product differentiation. So if, you go, I got to get the phone that has or I have to get the device that has that new technology. I want to be part of that community. I want to be doing that. So I think it's coming soon, but hopefully there's a lot of research questions to still answer about it. So.
Great. Well, thanks for a really interesting.
All right. Thanks for
a lot of really great points. So thank you.
So feel free to ask me more detailed questions later about every project, but please come find me. I'm in Siddhartha Hall, and I will be back here to crash your meetings and come back in the lab.